Welcome, Lucas. So to set it up, you are the CEO and co-founder of Weights and Biases, aka WandB. Weights and Biases is the developer-first MLOps platform. The company makes it easy to track your experiments, manage and version your data, and collaborate with your team so you can focus on building the best models. The company was started in 2018, and you have raised about 200 million in venture capital, if I read correctly. So you and I last sat down in September 2015, which is kind of a crazy thought. I guess we were both, 16 at the time. The company that you were talking about at the time was called CrowdFlower, which I believe was later rebranded into Figure 8. So I'd love to start with this, maybe the journey with that company, lessons learned there, and then what led you to start WandB as your next big project?
Yeah, totally. So CrowdFlower, that you're right, rebranded as Figure 8, was a data labeling platform primarily for machine learning applications. And I started that, I think it was 2007. So very early on, and very unclear at the time that data labeling would be a large market. And so the journey was really several years, I think, maybe before we actually raised any kind of significant funding. So we were really just trying to, sell data labeling for quite a while. And we kind of had an early run in sort of the search space. So we worked with Google and Yahoo and eBay and a lot of the e-commerce companies, and got a kind of a head start there. And then kind of had a lull for a while when there just wasn't a lot of stuff happening, it felt like, in data labeling, and then sort of reignited around self-driving cars, and kind of automotive became this huge application where we were sitting with good tools for that. So it was a long journey, and I got a chance to sell into many different parts of organizations, right? Because, in different kinds of companies, AI will roll up into different places. I mean, almost anywhere. It depends on the company. Could be like the CMO, could be, head of sales, could be, now it's typically in the tech org, like CTO or CIO, but really saw kind of every part of a business. And data labeling, I think, really wants to be a top-down sale. But my background is actually building and deploying machine learning models. And so, me and my co-founders are kind of looking at the space and thinking, there's not a lot of great tools for the ML developers themselves. And we really wanted to make stuff for that audience. So we started Weights and Biases really with more of a audience in mind, or a customer in mind, than an application. And I knew that I really loved working with people working on machine learning. Like, I always kind of felt a little bad when I would get pulled away from that into more executive conversations. So it was really fun to start Weights and Biases and just go right back into the weeds of helping with the details of developer issues, getting ML deployed. Although now it's funny, as we've grown, now we do talk to a lot of executives, and a lot of our customers, back when we started Weights and Biases, have been promoted several times. So now they themselves have become executives.
Great. Actually, to make this broadly interesting to a larger group of people, what is an ML developer? I think there's this concept that there's a lot of people like working on machine learning, but there's actually different flavors of like people actually building the models, people deploying the models. So what is an ML developer, and who's your target audience specifically?
Yeah, I mean, we say ML practitioner in our internal mission statement and stuff, because we want to keep it a little bit vague. Like, I've watched I think I was originally hired as like a research scientist and then became data scientist and now might be ML engineer. And so I think these titles change a lot, and in different industries, titles mean different things. So I don't mean like ML developer, like the title, I mean it more by the function. So we want to help the people that are literally just trying to get these models into production and do something. And there's different flavors, right? There's like typically like MLOps teams that are more operational, more like how do we make this like a reliable, repeatable process? And, we love them. We also love the more kind of like research scientist oriented, person who's trying to get the last, bit of accuracy out of their model. And now we see a whole new kind of archetype where it's like a software developer that's just really interested in machine learning and wants to get models working inside their company, maybe using like a third-party API or something like that. So we're not too precious about which version of that you are. I think we need to serve kind of all of those flavors of ML practitioners well.
Very interesting. All right. So I'd love to spend a good amount of time talking about the product and the platform. So you guys have shipped quite a lot of features and capabilities in a sort of broad horizontal way. And, you have 1B models, you have a platform, you have monitoring, you have prompts, which I believe is the most recent addition. So maybe walk us through what different parts do, maybe starting historically, like the first one you released, and then how the rest followed from there.
Totally. So we started with a product called Experiments, which at the time was kind of like a tensor board in the cloud. It was kind of how we thought about it. Like, we'd build a model and then kind of want to share the performance with somebody else. And it was kind of hard to just like, you'd screenshot your tensor board instance and send it over. And then you always want to do like slightly more complicated analysis than tensor board. And that was tough. And, at the time, like PyTorch, I don't think PyTorch ever really had a great tensor board integration. So we wanted to integrate with more stuff and just make it friendlier. And so that's, we call it Weights and Biases Experiments. And, I think we're well known for that. I don't know that we ever knew that would be like a great business, but it's actually, I've realized, it's a very important thing, right? I mean, I think without tracking all the things that go into building models, you can't have reproducibility and you can't have explainability. You can't really say that you're, doing like, I think ethical AI, no matter how you really define that, if you don't know how the model itself was built. So,
so tracking what goes into the model, is that data? Is that what is it? Is that the model part? Is that the data part?
Totally. I mean, I think there's like more things than you'd think, right? So, like when a model gets trained, the data is super important, right? The training data that it's learning from. Often there's like upstream pre-processing steps that are happening to the data before it's fed into the model. There's things called hyperparameters, which might be like, famous one is learning rate, sort of how fast does the model react to new data, but there's typically, thousands of these, kind of hyperparameters that people are always trying to tune. There's sort of the architecture of the model, and that's changed a lot over the years. So, there's like broad categories of model, but even if you think about like neural nets, there's like wildly different ways you can set that up. But then, there's actually a lot of other things that go into it, like, what GPUs did you train your model on? Like what infrastructure, were you using? Like what libraries were installed on your system when the model trained? And what we kind of realized was that people wanted to keep track of all this stuff, but they didn't want to like explicitly write it down. And so one of our core tenets is this kind of like one-line integration where you can just get as much value as possible by default and in the background. And you may never
system just tracks whatever you do and then just produces.
Yeah.
So this is a GPU you use, this is the data set you use, and you don't have to do anything.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's really important. And then of course it's important to like make it extensible and flexible. Then the other thing is that actually the performance metrics, which are all really complicated, right? Like, people always think like, okay, you're trying to optimize accuracy, but no one's ever really doing that, right? I mean, the self-driving car case is really interesting where it's like, okay, maybe your accuracy at detecting roads goes down, but your accuracy at detecting like bicyclists go up. What do you do with that? And typically you actually have like thousands of different complicated measures and you're trying to figure out like, okay, is this something I should deploy? And so we've actually added a lot of stuff to support this kind of general workflow. We spend quite a lot of time building something called artifacts, which keeps track of both the data flowing into the models and the models that come out of your training runs. And that's a tricky product to get right because the size of these files is so big typically, right? So, a lot of our customers are training on terabytes of data and it might be like slightly changing every day. They don't want to copy it over, but they do want to like have a good record of exactly what the model was trained on. And we looked at all the tools out there and none of them like kind of worked well for that use case we thought at the time. So we've built that whole system. And then kind of other highlights, our model registry has been really popular lately. So that's been really exciting to see. And that's like kind of simple, right? It's just tracking like, okay, what's going into production? Like when does it go into production? How is it evaluated? Lets you do kind of CI/CD on the model itself.
So it's a centralized place where regardless of where you are in the organization or what office or what have you, you can just go check out what models. If people will say, well, how many machine learning models do we actually have in production? That's where you can find out the answer.
Exactly. And like, in production is always this complicated thing in like a real organization, right? There's often like candidate models or ones getting like A/B tested. And, there's just, and sometimes you'll have some models in production that flow into other models in production. And so, it ends up like actually supporting real world workflows ends up being kind of a tricky thing that we're really passionate about. So that's something we're really proud of. That's been really popular lately. And then you mentioned prompts is kind of our latest thing, that we launched, which is all around essentially using LLMs, which was fun to make because, I mean, I feel so proud of this. Like, I think all of the major LLMs out there, almost all, were trained using weights and biases. So we had like seen all these come out. But then we were like shocked by how much adoption they've been getting lately. And people I think want to compare, asking GPT-4 to training your own model. And we of course want to support that.
Yeah. That's really amazing, by the way. As all those LLMs were trained using your products, is how exciting, how amazing. Okay, and obviously LLMs and generative AI. That's although that's been around for depending on how you count a couple of years, but like obviously that's the big sea change of the last few months. How was that transition for you guys, given that you had built this whole platform pre-explosion of LLMs? Do you view that as just like a plug and play? We have a broad platform. Here's a set of new capabilities, or does it change more than that?
It changes more than that. I mean, I think broadly, the workflow has a lot of similarities, right? Like I think, if you've used LLMs, I'm sure a lot of your audience has, and you're trying to get them into production. If you're an engineer, there's some things that surprise you, right? Like these things are very non-deterministic. It's very hard to tell if they're like working or not, right? And your workflow is very like experiment oriented, I think, where like with coding, it's so satisfying, right? Because you kind of write down these steps and then you debug it, and then it's like out, and it's like this deterministic thing that does what you think it does. Whereas the LLMs, it's much more like this exploratory process where you try it in different ways and see what happens. And so I think that exploratory workflow is something that we understand well and are like really passionate about, supporting. I think when you have that exploratory workflow, you really want an easy way to track everything that happens and, kind of see if weird things are happening in production. So those things are the same, but then there actually are some big differences. Like I think that, even the people working with a lot of these APIs, are like less huge math nerds than, some of the people that have been training, models for a long time. So like, you would not believe how much effort we've put into like making it like every possible graph available and every possible, I mean, we actually have like essentially like an arbitrary compute engine that you can run before you build a graph, because there's been so many requests for like different kinds of crazy graphs. And it's just like our audience just loves, like loves graphs if you're building models. But I think in the LLM world, like the anecdote is something people really pay attention to. So it's like, you're building these prompts and you want to just like really see like, okay, like how is this thing responding? And okay, can you find me some like weird examples and like what's happening there? So we spend a lot of time on like, kind of making text display well and like having like nice tables of text and like different ways to like kind of search it. And and embeddings is a really interesting thing where you can kind of find a notion of similarity. But I mean I think the products end up looking pretty different, even though they support a workflow with a lot of similarities.
Great. What about the monitoring part?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I think the monitoring of LMs is like very nascent, right? So, we're having this conversation like in August 2023, and I feel like anything I say is going to be out of date very quickly, right? But I think probably the observation that is true of models, even worse for using LLMs, is that these systems don't do a great job of like notifying you when something's breaking. So people talk a lot about data drift in the industry. And that's this idea that like, like language changes over time and you want to know that it's changing and sort of like have your model, notice that and update it. But I guess like what I see actually in the real world doing this for like 20 years is just like incredibly heartbreakingly like stupid mistakes that cause models to go like totally haywire in production and not tell you. And I think actually like monitoring for that is a pretty unsolved problem. I think people tend to notice these things from downstream user like behavior metrics and things like that, and then get really frustrated, and then you sort of like fix the one like weird thing that you did that caused the model to go haywire. But I think that monitoring these things is tough, and essentially like our point of view is like we want to give people ways to build their own custom alerts and their own analyses of what's going on.
Are you seeing a surge in actual use cases of those things? I mean, given that it's all pretty recent, obviously there's tons of interest, but just in your almost daily usage on the 1B platform, are you seeing people actually deploying those products in the enterprise?
Well, those are some different questions. So, we have seen, steady growth in usage since the company started, which feels great. So like, we're really happy about, and it's not even like there's sort of one moment. It's just been sort of like more and more enthusiasm, for ML and then like LLMs, and like more and more people use our platform every day, which is awesome. I think that LLMs in particular, we talk to a lot of the people and we don't see a ton of people getting them into production yet. And I think it's funny, like VCs are always surprised, like when we tell them that. I think that, I don't know, I'm bullish on LLMs, but I think like we should just acknowledge most enterprises haven't gotten them into production because it's actually hard. And, I think the stuff has like been obviously working for like less than 6 months. And so I think it's a time where we should be like a little bit patient, in the short term. I think we see pockets of applications that work so well that they are getting deployed. And I would say that's like, one is like search just works like phenomenally better with LMs, to the point where people are deploying custom, internal search stuff inside their organizations really effectively. And I think chat has just gotten so much better that like people are actually like really using it for, various chat applications. But then there's tons of things that people are trying. However, I think most of the things are not in production yet. And, production is a funny thing too, where I think people sort of like gradually productionize these things. I think we see a lot of stuff running like asynchronously in the back end. And so it's like useful for something, but that's not exactly like production in the same way that like, like serving, like a classifier for your like users live is.
Yeah, actually, as a little bit of a tangent on this, what are you seeing in terms of the most sophisticated organization that you work with? Like, rough estimate, like how many models do they actually have in production, with the caveat that you just described? Just to give us a sense for like the state of maturity of this industry.
Totally. Well, I'll tell you one funny thing, right? So we have a model registry where we can like count how many models people have, in production. But, the most common question that I get when I go into like an organization and talking about the model registry is like, what should be like the model here, right? Like, because like, in the real world, you have typically like a model that's relying on classifications from like upstream models. So, we have organizations that you might think of as having one real like application, but inside our model registry, they have hundreds of models that they're actually like tracking separately and deploying, separately. And so when I see these like, crazy, like, studies where they ask like CIOs, like, okay, how many models do you have in production? I have a feeling they have like no idea, or like, I wonder if you ask the same CIO on 2 different days, like how different the answer would really be. Cause I don't think it's like sort of saying like, how many like applications do you have in production? I think you probably get a lot of different answers, inside an organization. I mean, that said, we certainly have, customers that, will have like hundreds of models, but I don't know if that really correlates with, customers' level of, sophistication. Like, I think, OpenAI has been like a longtime customer. I mean, I consider them like extraordinarily sophisticated, and they have a pretty small number of models in production. So
Yeah.
No,
Interesting. And if this whole world of LLM and generative AI is nascent and emerging, what is sort of the bread and butter in terms of like use cases at Weights and Biases, in terms of what you see your customers use the platform? What do they do in terms of actual machine learning?
well, I mean, so like, I would say the majority of users on our platform still are building their own models. I think that it is kind of amazing when we look at, like, I think like one thing that surprises people when they look at the company is how broad our customer base is, right? So like, like a lot of people come in, they're like, hey, what, Lucas, like, why don't you like, verticalize your like messaging, like you sell into so many different places. But it's like, well, no one vertical is more than like, 15% of our usage or revenue or anything like that. So it's kind of cool, right? Like ML is like just really, really broadly applicable. There's like a lot of like manufacturing use cases of like just like quality control from images. There's like, making like cool characters inside video games. There's like, looking at like health records and trying to predict if someone's going to get, sick. I mean, there really are just so many different, applications of ML. And I think when one gets like really kind of cookie cutter, then you get a company that does a great job with it, and people just buy the model from that, company that's like offering a complete packaged solution. So like sort of Wild West. I mean, even in terms of like modeling approaches, I think people are surprised to learn that a lot of people still running, boosted trees or, random forests inside of Weights and Biases. So it's like actually huge. We should probably do a blog post. Still a big fraction of our, of our user base. In fact, it's even kind of growing, I think, because, we got our start in deep learning, and then, it's been later that more traditional methods kind of, came in. And then we see a ton of different, I mean, I think a big trend of the last year or two has been fine tuning. It's gotten so much easier with great like offerings like Hugging Face, making that easier. So now tons of people do it. And then, like using LLMs and I think another important point I'd make on all this is like sophisticated customers will typically do all of these things, right? So it's not like, I think there's sort of a sense that like, oh, if you're more sophisticated, you sort of like, move closer to current approaches. But I actually think like truly sophisticated customers, they use like the right tool for the right job, and they're not afraid to use like a logistic regression, where appropriate still. So we really try to support all the different ways that you might do ML.
Yeah. And a standard way of thinking about the innovation curve from like a Valley and VC perspective is typically like the big tech companies, the Ubers of the world, are the more sophisticated ones, more willing to experiment, and that propagates through smaller startups and then to the global 2000. Is that sort of what you're finding, or are you seeing that the global 2000 are already pretty sophisticated when it comes to deploying machine learning in production?
Well, I mean, I'll say this, most of our revenue comes from the global 2000. So it's not like we only sell to like the Ubers and Apples and OpenAIs of the world. We do. I think, I mean, I actually think that machine learning works so well and so obviously well for a lot of applications right now. I think people are kind of surprised to learn that I bet every might be strong. I bet 99% of the global 2000 is using machine learning for something that they actually really care about. Mm-hmm. Like I think there's way more applications than people realize, like supply chain predictions, like sales forecasting, and like you might say, well, why do people build like custom models for all this stuff? But it's like, why do people build their own tech stack? It's like everybody has like a slightly different set of priorities, slightly different set of metrics they're trying to optimize. People think this stuff is core, so they don't want to outsource it. So I think that our TAM is, I mean, I'm talking to VC, I guess. I don't know if you believe this, but I genuinely believe, I'm not pitching you, but I think our TAM is like basically all the global 2000. They all, should be using weights and biases, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, wholeheartedly agree. Any difference per vertical? Anything surprising, like different industries being more at the forefront than you would believe?
Yeah, I mean, I always say this, I guess. Maybe it's getting boring, but I feel like people are always surprised by this. I think pharma is investing way more in deep learning than people realize. We've been really surprised by our usage. We sell to most of the big pharma companies, and they're really sophisticated, and it's like really, I think, working for them. And I think there's like a lag between when you, develop like a new medicine and when it's like out into the world. So people say, oh, there's no like medicines developed in this way that like are actually like FDA approved, but it's like, okay, it takes 5 years no matter how good it is. So I think that that's like a big growth area. And I think like the manufacturing use cases are also really, I think it's bigger than people realize. Like even, we sell into automotive, most of automotive, and we do self-driving cars, of course, right? That's, table stakes these days. But I think most of these companies are also trying to automate their factories, and that's another big undertaking. Mm-hmm. I've also been surprised that there's a lot of gaming applications. I'm not like super big gamer, but some of our employees get like super excited when we sell to these like gaming companies that I often embarrassingly like haven't heard of, but they do. I think a lot of the sort of game development has moved to ML processes in the last couple of years.
Yeah, very cool. So just switching gears a little bit on and focusing on the sort of go-to-market aspect of this, selling a broad horizontal platform is awesome when you get there and when you do have all those global 2000 customers, but it can be pretty daunting. You mentioned, the temptation to verticalize or not. Like, how do you think about it? How do you sell? What's your go-to-market motion?
Yeah, and I will say it's like it took us a really long time to get this working, and there was like never like a moment where we felt like good about it. So it's funny to go back to like the early graphs. I remember like getting excited because like we were like at 30 weekly active users and like telling my early investors, and they're just like, Lucas, like, what are you doing? Like, what are you talking about? But it's actually kind of funny because the one thing about the graph was that it was like basically always going up. Yeah, so that gave me some hope. But it was really small for a really long time. And there wasn't, people talk about like an inflection point, but that really hasn't been our experience. It's been sort of like, kind of like slow exponential growth that when you zoom out, it looks amazing, but when you're actually in it, it doesn't, feel that amazing. And it's been the biggest driver of new users has always been mystery. We call it like direct. It's like they just show up to the website and they just use the product. And I think like we've tried to like triangulate this a zillion different ways. And I think it's basically word of mouth. So I think we actually have a product that people like. And we know this because we measure NPS in a bunch of different ways religiously. And these days our NPS is like 80, right? So I do think there's like a lot of love for weights and biases. There are some angry people, and you can reach out and tell me how much you hate my product, and I'll try to make it better for you. But mostly when we do random surveys of users, they're really excited about it. So I think that actually has been, it's kind of unsatisfying, but that's been the biggest driver. Lately, SEO has become more and more of a driver for us. That's also been a very slow build. But like people can publish content, and now we've been doing it for a couple of years. People publish tons of content on weights and biases. I think slowly like Google has decided to prioritize our stuff more and more. So that's typically nowadays, people's we get more people coming to view weights and biases reports than to actually use weights and biases. So
yeah, as an aside on this, on the sort of developer focus go-to-market motion, I saw that the weights and biases blog is actually open to others to publish on. I'm curious how that's working, what you're seeing. I just think it's a very cool way of doing it, as opposed to just the company talking to the community, having the community being part of the content production under the company's name.
Yeah, at first I think we did it because we didn't have like a lot of resources to write stuff. And I felt like proud when people would do cool stuff on weights and biases. Like, when you're really early, you kind of spy on your users. We can't do that anymore, but we would kind of watch what people are doing for the first year. And there wasn't that many of them. And I was like kind of manning intercom. So they would like write in and talk to me and kind of become like friends with the people. I'm like, wow, like, would you mind just sort of like sharing this thing that you already have inside of, weights and biases? So that's been cool. I mean, it's funny. I always feel a little bit like, companies like Streamlit do an even better job of kind of community building. And I feel like we have like still a lot to learn, but I do really love giving a forum to people that are doing interesting stuff. And I think a cool thing about the machine learning community in general is it does feel like there's a lot of publishing sort of outside of the typical journal. A lot of sharing of like best practices. I think it's sort of the academic background of it kind of makes people more excited to like just post stuff on Twitter. And from my perspective, it's like fantastic. Even if it wasn't on, weights and biases, I think ML Twitter is pretty cool. And the cool thing, like LLMs in a way, they're like even easier to kind of understand. So like, ML paper is often hard to parse the math, but like an LLM paper where like somebody comes up with like a new prompt, I kind of feel like anyone can actually like engage with it. And some of these ideas are so clever,
Yeah.
I sort of expect that to grow.
Yeah, I really agree.
Yeah.
What else do you do to win the hearts and minds of developers? Whatever you learn over the years works, doesn't work.
I mean, the other big thing for us has been integrations. So we have like, I think like over 10,000 third-party integrations. Just like we count open source projects that import weights and biases is how we measure that. But we used to really beg people. We still really beg people to integrate with us, and then we like try to make sure they stay good. And that's always been. I always kind of feel like that's part of the product, right? Because if weights and biases like errors when it's like imported into somebody else's project, people are still mad at weights and biases if that's like the thing that shows up in the error message. So I think we have this awesome team that basically just like kind of manages these integrations and tries to help make them good.
That's a huge number. So developers do create the integration for their product, but the weights and biases team does quality control and maintenance of it. Is that how it works?
Well, I'd say that's our dream state. We also, submit PRs and get them rejected and yelled at. And, I mean, it's a little messier in reality. But yeah, we want third-party developers to want to integrate with us and feel like that's a good experience. That's really important to us. Yeah. And that actually is another place that drives a lot of traffic because you kind of catch people right at the moment where they, are like looking for a tool.
Yeah. So what else moves the needle? Like quality of documentation, have you found makes a difference?
Well, you know, it's funny. I always feel bad about the quality of our documentation. Sometimes people tell me it's good and I don't believe them. Sometimes people tell me it's bad and I get really anxious, but I don't know how to measure that. Like, I think it really matters. I think it really matters. But I don't have any metric that like proves it. And I think like it'd be interesting to actually look at our NPS and see people specifically on the docs what they think. But some people say it's great, some people hate it.
Yeah.
I think yeah. Yeah, what else has mattered?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. I feel like we oh, you know, lately actually, it's kind of funny. We got our start. I was teaching some ML classes, or that was one of the things that started us. I actually think this was an amazingly good experience because I was teaching classes on ML and I was using weights and biases. And so what would happen was I would actually just watch like 80 students onboard all at once.
Mm.
And a lot of them would fail. And that would like really stress me out because I'm literally like in front of the class trying to get them to use like my buggy product. And they're like mad at me, you know? And so that was
back, yeah.
I know exactly. And I would get so anxious. And then you'd sort of realize like, you know, where people get stuck is like weird places. Like it's not, I think like you just, I don't know, it's hard to know. Like just like people don't know to copy the API key. They don't know they like can copy it, you know, or like, I mean, just like weird stuff. Or like, you know, a lot of people run in collabs and then the collab breaks and you don't notice. I mean, there's just a lot of weird things. Or like, you know, Windows terminal is always always something like messed up about that. So that's been kind of, I think that was a really good experience. And then lately we've actually started putting out you know, more courses again. And that's been a great source of actually enterprise leads, which is always something we care about a little more because they're easier to monetize than like random people. But I love putting out courses because it feels like
online courses where if you go to the site, you can just
get
okay.
We try to do like mid-level technical content because I always feel like that's the gap. Like I feel like, you know, for like super advanced stuff, there's like, you know, you can take like all the Stanford classes for free. And for like the really basic stuff, I feel like there's like a million courses, like intro to ML. But I always sort of feel like, you know, the developer that like wants to get an ML model like working in production, like trained it once, but it's just like, okay, what do I do now? Like that's always feels like the gap for me. And so we've been putting out our own course material lately, which I love because I feel like sometimes I feel like content marketing, like people just want to put out like more crap into the world.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't even say that. I think we've
I think you've
done that, but like you know,
very true.
but it's like so much more satisfying to like actually do something useful for somebody. And I do think there's this funny gap in courses where like it's not like a sexy thing to teach like, you know, machine learning 201 for developers. But we're down to do it as best we can. And it's cool. We can make it all free because just the lead generation justifies the undertaking.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So to close on the go-to-market motion, so this is the developer kind of bottoms-up part, but you mentioned that most of your customers are global 2000 customers. So like, have you guys presumably flipped at some point where you also need a top-down, like a sales force that goes talk to those people? Or I guess what is the go-to-market motion, the full go-to-market motion?
Totally. So I think that's what I actually think this is a lot of ML companies struggle with this. And my board was like complaining about this for a long time. Maybe they still secretly harbor resentment. I don't know if they're listening. But I think like the challenge that we have is like, we're not like a, you know, like a Figma where like we just totally spread virally within an organization. But the good thing is people do like use us in pockets for free quite a bit inside everywhere. And you know, most of ML is inside of enterprise. That's where like most of the interesting work happens because that's where most of the data is. And so we have a lot of usage in most of the, you know, what do you call it, global 2000, but it really unlocks it to have a salesperson talk to them. So you can totally buy us with a credit card. And I really want to make it so you can do a managed cloud deploy with a credit card. We haven't quite gotten that yet, but we've tried to make that like, you know, one click, boom, you have it. And so, but we've really found that once we have some traction inside an organization, if we go in and we talk to the MLOps team and kind of get them on our side, then we can get companies to standardize on us. So, for example, we'll have like credit card usage inside, I don't know, like pick your, like Apple, for example, like people think like, oh, it's impossible to sell to Apple. I don't know. Like if you have a useful product, they can buy with a credit card. They will buy with a credit card. But then when they get to a certain scale, they're like, wait, I want like security features. Like we need stuff. And then it's just an easier, sales conversation. I'm acting like this is also trivial. It's like definitely not, but that is like our dream motion. And it really does. Like if you squint, that is like what's happening. It's like you get traction, salesperson talks to them, 4 months of like random IT bullshit, and then we get a bigger install.
/ procurement / legal.
Yeah, exactly.
Who have you found for machine learning tools company is a good archetype for a salesperson, especially the first few? Are they engineers turned salespeople? Are they salespeople who are more technical, or do you have a pod approach where you have like an AE and a technical person with them?
Ooh, I think a lot about this. I've been like thinking about this for like 15 years now. I took a lot of my good reps from my last company because I think they, kind of saw who was good at this. I'll tell you, when I interview like an AE, I'm kind of asking myself like one question, which is just like, if my good friend was trying to buy weights and biases, would I like hand them to this person? And there's like so many different ways that someone could be good at that, right? Like, I think if they're like nice and like humble and they'll just like actually like listen to what the person's saying and like, treat them well, like that's like a great way. And you don't have to be super technical. If they are like, some of these reps are like amazingly technically deep. Like, I don't know, we have this like VP of business development, and I feel like you ask him like a random open source software, like he'll give you the one sentence on what it does. It's like amazing. Like, I always feel bad. Like I should be more on top of this stuff. I don't know how he does that. Right. But that's like actually like a pretty useful thing. So I think it's like, it's really important that they bring a kind of like humility and curiosity to the table, but it's like hard to put your finger on. I think I've just seen so many different ways to be successful as a sales rep. It's not like I have like one thing, but I do think like I have a pretty good instinct with that question that I'm like asking myself, and just like, what's going to happen when I, when I hand my, my random friend who's like a lowly ML engineer at some random enterprise, like, are they going to like that experience?
Yeah, I love that question as a test. I think that's really, really good and interesting.
It's like nobody wants to golf or anything. That's for sure, right? Like, there's people that like a super aggressive salesperson. Some of my salespeople are really competitive. I am actually really competitive myself, but they kind of like suppress it in a way that I think like kind of works with a technical audience. Like, I feel like a lot of engineers actually are pretty competitive, but you kind of don't, you don't sort of like lead with that. Like you don't get crass, you don't like, no, and nobody wants to do any of the like, nobody even wants to really go out to dinner, right? They just want like, to get the facts like quickly in the same way,
Yeah. As a leader, in this crazy time for AI and like all the hype and all the things, like how do you, first of all, keep track of what's going on, which feels like, just that is a full-time job for all of us who care about this domain, and two, sort of filter through the noise and decide whether to, panic, not panic, act, take a breather. How do you make sense of all of that?
Well, I think like one thing that's really important is to stay current. Like I always think about like, okay, like I need to put pressure where other people are not putting pressure, right? So the board, the company will put plenty of pressure to hit quarterly ARR numbers. It's really important, but there actually is just like mechanisms that puts tons of pressure on that. So I think like where I need to apply pressure is like, hey, let's think like long-term here. Let's be like disciplined and, honest with ourselves. But the more important thing is like make a better product if you can, honestly do that. Right. And I think the same thing for my own like management of myself. It's like, no one's really going to notice if I spend a week and I'm not like trying new technologies and I'm not learning, nobody's going to tell me to do that. People are going to tell me to like be on their podcast. They're going to tell me to like be on a sales call. They're going to tell me to like do all these things. But like, I feel like my job is to kind of fight that. And I carve out time in two ways. Like one is, every Wednesday I really have like no meetings, and I really, really try to like hold on to that. And the other is I learned this from Lucerne, the New Relic, CEO. I remember he's running a public company. I talked to him. I think he told me he took 1 week off a month to just like write code himself and like enjoy his own product. And I was just like, wow, if a public company exec can do that, I should be able to do that. And so I really try to take like blocks of weeks off. And I just really, really try to fight like all the pressure that, as I'm saying, I haven't done it in a little while. I try to do it once a quarter, but I haven't done it in the last quarter. But I think it's like really important. I mean, I also think like, learning by doing is like my only good way for learning. So I don't know, like if you tell me about somebody's product, I haven't used it, it's kind of in one ear and out the other. But like once I use the product, I feel like I understand it. So I have a very inefficient learning process, I think, where it's like I have to like, I don't know. Today I have to use Airflow to like understand Airflow. I have to like use like Dagster to like get it. And, but I think that I really push myself to do it.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And speaking of products in that general space, whether you've tried them or not yet, sort of taking your 1B hat off for a minute, what do you find interesting, intriguing, again, whether you've done it or stuff like you want to explore on your to-dos list in that broad generative AI, certainly, but broader ML space?
That's a good question. I think, Ray Anyscale is a really beautifully done product. It's like one of those ones where I don't know, I admire it, wish I made it. I feel the same way about like Streamlit, where it's just like, I feel like it's so beautifully simple. Its onboarding is so tight, and it's just so delightful. I think DBT, boy, I wish I made that. That was a good idea. Damn. What else? I think like Keras, I feel like it's kind of fallen out of favor, but that was such a good product, like documented so well. Just like, I feel like it's just designed with this amazing interface. And of course we see more Lightning now. And I mean, obviously PyTorch is like, I think PyTorch is like phenomenal. Like everyone thought TensorFlow had won.
Yeah.
And PyTorch
2017, right?
Yeah, totally. And like, I feel like PyTorch came in, I feel like I really am trying to study this because it's like such a amazing case study where I don't think I think people tell the story of sort of the silver bullet of like, the eager execution model. But I think the reality is they just built a product with so much more empathy. I really think that, I don't know, I always liked using PyTorch. Everyone else felt the same way, where I was like, I think TensorFlow, I should be using it. All their customers would say this, like, oh, probably all your other customers use TensorFlow in production, but I don't know, we just like PyTorch. We don't know if it's like can be put into production, but we are, and then the PyTorch team's asking us like, hey, do you have any like case studies of stuff in production using PyTorch? And we're sort of like, all of our customers are doing it and feeling a little guilty about it. So you probably have a brand perception issue, but you've made something just really like nice, and then I think Lightning did a great job on top of it. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, some of these products are really great. I mean, it's and they're great in different ways. Like I don't know.
I love that word you used, empathy, as a sort of like design principle. I just think it's so beautiful and elegant.
I know everybody talks about it, but it's so hard to actually do, because like if you actually empathize with your customers, they want such annoying things. You know what I mean?
For free.
yeah, exactly.
All right. So what maybe to close, what's on the docket for Weights and Biases in the next, I don't know, 6 months, year, in terms of roadmap releases, anything you can or want to talk about?
Totally. I mean, so prompts is a big deal for us. So we're trying to make like MLOps tooling. Evaluation is something that we really want to explore. And I think it's really important. We're putting a lot of effort into monitoring LLMs and monitoring, non-LLMs. That's a big, undertaking for us. And then we have this really cool thing that we call Weave, where you can do pretty arbitrary data explorations inside of weights and biases, and we'll kind of handle the compute at scale. So that's like a little bit more of our moonshot, but that's also something that we're investing in, kind of opening up our platform that we've been using internally for years to like let people build their own ML applications on top of us.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, all right. Well, that feels like a wonderful place to leave it. Thank you so much. Where can people follow you? Obviously, learn more about the company. Socials. Where should they go?
Well, you can go to WNV.com, or you can follow me at L2K on Twitter.
Okay. All right. Terrific. Thank you so much, Lucas. We appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.